Yeah, so it'd be great to learn about your background and how you came to join the GitHub Design Systems team.
Well, when I joined GitHub, I was actually hired as a product designer to work on their core product. So things like issues and milestones and stuff like that. And so there wasn't actually a design systems team. And they were doing a lot of, I started at a funny time of year just because it was the end of the year. So I had a bit of downtime before projects really kicked off. And so I just started to dig around in the CSS and start sort of taking stock of things and asking questions. From there, I started to feel like we needed to make some improvements to the style guide. Primer was already in existence then, but there was a lot of CSS that was not in Primer, and styles that weren't documented, which seemed like a bit of a problem. It seemed like as a new person, it was hard to hit the ground running and be able to design in the browser really quickly, which is something that I had been used to at Etsy, because I helped work on a style guide there, and we had a really great setup for prototyping and stuff. So so there wasn't a design systems team, and I guess I just sort of started to say I think we should have one, and ask the design leads and a couple of other people who was interested in working on this stuff. And so we started just started meeting and talking about some of the problems, and then it became a more serious thing, and it became clear that it was important that we needed to really continue with this work. And so then it became my full-time role after a while, because it became too difficult to work on product work and that at the same time.
Gotcha. Was it difficult to get buy-in to create the design system?
I don't think it was too difficult to get buy-in that we needed something, because there already was. We weren't starting from scratch. There was Primer. Also, I think it helped that Mark Cotto was the head of design, and he built Bootstrap, so he sort of understood those sorts of needs. I think what was difficult is to get people on board with restructuring how Primer worked and how that CSS was written, and getting buy-in from, I guess, getting designers and engineers to really use the system. So that took a bit of time.
What type of restructuring was needed on your end? Was it fairly drastic?
Well, in some ways, yes, and in some ways, no. We started off, I guess the main thing was that we had not very flexible styles. And so we started off by, one of the first things we did was start to introduce utilities or atomic classes, because that was something that we could add on top of what was already there without having to refactor every single component in the system. So that gave us some quick wins and allowed us to start introducing actual systems behind the styles. So typography scale, spacing scale, and experiment and test it out with utilities, and then start to bring those systems over to our components. It's going to take us a long time to get through refactoring all of our CSS. We don't really have the opportunity to start with a clean slate, so it's a lot of iterating on what's already there. And then there's some things that have been, bigger, larger, sort of sweeping updates, but a lot of it has been small additions and iteration on stuff. So I think it took a bit of getting used to for people who weren't really familiar with functional CSS or atomic classes and things like that. So once people started to build out pages with that stuff, it kind of clicked, and then people really started to really love that way of working with CSS and started asking for more, kind of. So,
Right. What were some of the issues that you were hoping to resolve by having a design system in place at GitHub?
I think there's like two kind of sides to it for me. One is improving the design to development workflow. So making it easier and faster to design in the browser, making it easier for people to not have to worry about primitive decisions in design, and to spend more time thinking about the bigger user experience problems and product decisions. So that's definitely a really big part of it, is improving that design development workflow. And then the other side of it is consistency in user experience. So if we don't build with consistent styles, then the user doesn't see consistent styles. And it's not just styles, it's also like interaction patterns and page layouts. So like a lot of projects that we do have that kind of dual benefit of making our style guide easier to work with, and then making the UI easier to use.
Right. Now at GitHub, is the design systems team expanded, or are you still the sole owner and sort of manager?
Well, there's two of us on this full time, and then we have a group of contributors. So we're organized like an open source project with core maintainers and contributors who are spread across product and creative teams. And so I'm the lead for the design systems team, and then one of the designers, John Rohan, who has been working on Primer quite a long time and has also got more of an engineering background. We're the two that are on this full time, and we're about to open a position to hire a new designer on the team. So hoping to expand that to 3. Yeah.
So with the current team structure that you have, what does the design systems maintenance and updating process look like? So for instance, when I talked with Joe from Intuit, the process there was anybody could request an update to the design system. They had to fill out a proposal, and then that was sent through to the team. And they have about, I think he said 7 to 8 full-time people on their team. They would review the proposal and work with the person who suggested it to see if it made sense to update their design system. Do you guys work with a similar process?
We don't have anything as formal as a proposal that people have to make, but we do have contribution guidelines for the team. Some things come through they're smaller requests, like I keep finding I need this thing and it doesn't seem to exist, and so I'll do a quick review of the code base and see how much we seem to be using that pattern, and whether it does already exist in a component or a utility or not. And so then it'll be just a case of just opening an issue, and then we just try and get to it when we can. We do hold like regular prioritization and planning meetings. So that's usually to look at bigger projects. And to help us get through smaller issues, we have a monthly bug rotation, which isn't really just about killing bugs. It's about tackling smaller tasks like missing documentation or extending a component style. And then, yeah, sometimes product designers, as part of their work, if they're doing something that's quite a big redesign, then there might be a need for a new component. And so that hasn't happened too much yet, but what usually happens when that does come up is that one of the, like myself or one of the contributors will pair with that person and just walk them through how to construct that component, and that will go up into a pull request for feedback from not just from design systems but also from other design teams, because like usually we we're trying not to work in isolation, and there's a lot of moving parts to GitHub, and so getting eyes on this sort of stuff from a lot of product design will help us find out, oh, actually this is really similar to this thing over here, and maybe we need to rethink how we've styled this. So
right.
Yeah.
Over the years since you have built and evolved this design system, what are some challenges that you have faced along the way in that journey?
Many challenges. I think really it is finding ways to inspire and excite the rest of the team, to get them on board, and to try and explain the why behind what we're doing and why we're changing the class naming convention, or why we're changing how we construct the CSS, or that's something that's been challenging. I think like walking into this, I was very much thinking about the CSS and the sort of design development workflow, and hadn't really considered how much would be about communication. So we've had to work on a number of things, like from how we propose like the changes in our pull requests and getting eyes on that from the rest of the team, to broadcasting the updates that we make a bit more widely. So we have like an internal team blog thing, and then we just like post stuff on there. Also communicating through the style guide, so we make sure that we put clear statuses on everything, and link to an issue for feedback, and have a change log and things like that. So that communication aspect, we hit a few bumps in the road before we realized how important that was. So that was definitely challenging. The other thing is just balancing doing the maintenance work and the big refactoring work, that is kind of a little bit invisible, because it's stuff that's like tidying up stuff behind the scenes that is not necessarily changing how things look, and balancing that work and showing also that we're actually doing constructive work with the sort of more innovative stuff, the new stuff, the stuff that paves new pathways, introduces new patterns, or improves workflows, because they're like very sort of different mindsets and different types of work. And we also, as we have grown as a team, as in people know that we exist, more and more teams using the design systems, we also get more notifications to review pull requests, or to help people out with stuff, or to give feedback on things. So there's that gives you get a bit of noise from that, and so that's difficult when you're trying to do like maybe a big code refactor and you need to be focused. So we've had to figure out ways how to manage that sort of workflow, and we introduced a on-call duty system, which many of the teams at GitHub do, and it's called First Responder. And so each week someone's a first responder, so that they can try and like deal with most of that noise and make sure that people get responded to quickly, so that other people can be focused on more of the project work.
Right. And you mentioned that one of the challenges with working on the design system was getting people excited and on board with the idea. What tactics did you find were particularly effective at evangelizing and spreading the design system methodology?
I mean, I think being really helpful and being very available to start with. So anytime someone was working on something and pinged us, or maybe they didn't ping us and I saw they were working something, just try to go, oh, hey, did you know that these patterns already exist? You don't actually need to write new CSS here. And just being very available when people needed help, because we needed to win friends to start with. So that was definitely one thing. Another thing was just trying to get everything documented, because we had, all these styles that weren't in Primer and that had no documentation. So people aren't going to use something if they don't know it exists. So we've put a huge amount of effort into getting as much stuff documented as possible. And so then people, now that the documentation is more thorough, and it's more valuable to people and people use it more, and then they know that thing exists, and it's easier to use. If it's easier to use that than write new CSS, then that's going to win people over. And I think the final thing is that once people do use the new stuff, if they enjoy using the new stuff more than they do writing and battling with old styles, then that's going to make them want to keep using those styles. So making sure that your design system actually is enjoyable to use does make that design development workflow faster and easier and better.
Right.
So I think that's a big part of it.
And back in the beginning of the process, when you were first auditing all the existing design components and look and feel, did you find that there was a lot of unexpected inconsistency, or was it in line with sort of the scope of work that you had imagined for creating the design system?
I mean, it wasn't a surprise to me. I think it's not the first time I've worked in a company that has many people contributing to the code base, and I think that's to be expected. That's going to happen over time, and I think it takes. I think a lot of companies don't start out thinking, okay, one of the first teams we're going to make is a design systems team. I think it's when things start to become quite painful that they then realize, oh, actually we do need people focused on this. So the GitHub's been around for quite a few years, and it's had hundreds of engineers and designers contributing to that. So I nothing was really super surprising to me. I mean, probably the one thing that did surprise me the most was the lack of a color system, which I recently worked on, and I'm sort of a little baffled to how people have been working without that existing for a while. So
interesting. And do you find that having a development background as a designer on a design systems team is particularly useful in everyday work?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it helps you can't build. I mean, it means that you can help build the design system. I think that it's more likely to be successful and be implemented if you can actually also take part in building it. I think you have to work probably a lot harder on building a really strong relationship with an engineer to be like, here, I've mocked up all this stuff. Now, can you please build it for me? Not saying that can't happen, but I think it's very empowering if you can build it yourself. And then I think you just have a much better understanding of what this also means for engineers. It's like when we design systems, it's not just for designers, it's for anyone that's working on the front end. So yeah, absolutely. I don't know how I would really approach this if I didn't have that sort of those skills, really.
Right. And it's interesting that you mentioned, of course, that design systems are for both designers and developers. And of course, the sort of priorities between the two can sometimes be different. Do you find that there is there is sort of a balancing act in creating and maintaining this design system, when you want to make sure that all the components and all the visual patterns are coherent, but at the same time, you don't want to prescribe too much so that it feels like the designers are sort of just in a pure implementation role.
I mean, I think like if you're working, if unless you're like the sole person building a thing, you're always going to have to collaborate with people and make some compromises. And for a design systems team, all your colleagues are kind of your primary users. Like everything you do for them does also benefit the customers too, but like your kind of first primary user is all of your colleagues. And so if you're designing anything, you need to have empathy for them and take those needs into consideration. And I, and that means understanding like the pain that it might cause an engineer if you do things one way that is preferable to a designer. So it's about having conversations around that and seeing if you can find something that works for both. And then for designers, like I think that this doesn't take away creativity and just means they're implementing stuff. Like I think this actually removes some of the mundane decisions out of things and things that they shouldn't even be needing to think about, and it gives them more freedom to think about much bigger problems than what everyone always uses the what color should the button be example, but there's a lot of problems and to think about when you're designing a new feature, and the last thing I want designers to have to think about is like, how do I need to write this CSS? So
right. And you mentioned it's really interesting that you mentioned that sometimes there's compromises that you have to make because this is something that serves both designers and developers. Are there any that pop up in your mind through the years of having worked on this design system that were just necessary to get this implemented and useful for both groups of people?
I think the only one that really like springs to mind that feels like a compromise, but I think I'm okay with that, is that, we have some patterns in our code base that could be achieved probably all with like utilities and single purpose classes. But for some patterns, you kind of end up paying for that a little bit in the markup, because you can have end up with quite a lot of markup. And if you're repeating that stuff in many places, that can feel a little bit, it doesn't feel dry to engineers. And it also can mean people are worried about keeping consistency. And so we're not, there are solutions to that. Like I think a lot of people are using things like React and extracting things at a component level, which has the HTML, the markup, and the CSS and the JS all together. We don't have something quite like that in our stack at the moment. There are ways that we can abstract patterns, but sometimes we decide to group that up into a CSS component, rather than having a lot of utility classes repeated. So I that to me is a compromise, but quite a reasonable one in the way things are right now. But if I was working on a personal project, then I might not do that. But otherwise maybe I'm just like really persuasive and get everyone to agree with me eventually. I don't know. I think that's one of the things that I enjoy about working on teams, though, is like when you do feel like you're making decisions that everybody is excited about and happy about, and doing things that everyone wants. So like compromise isn't always a negative thing, I think.
Right, right. Have you found that the technology stack at GitHub has also evolved alongside the design system, or perhaps as a result of the design system? Or are you still more or less using the same tools and frameworks as before you had a design system in place?
I think we're starting to get to that point now. I think, like, honestly, we have had a lot of work to do just to sort of get our base design systems into place. But I think we're starting to get to that point now. At the moment, we're rethinking how we do package up stuff and how we pull in Primer. At the moment, it lives in GitHub because we just really felt like we need to bring all this CSS together and get pushed out to the repo, and we want to change that. And we've been talking with the web systems team, who sort of support us kind of in an engineering way, as well as a lot of the rest of the company. And so they're helping us come up with a solution that works not just for us, but for them and other teams as well. So I think that we're at that point where that's starting to happen. But there hasn't been huge changes quite yet.
Got it. And how does the team measure the success of the design system? Are there certain metrics that you guys are looking at to evaluate, if certain changes to the design system are making the intended impact?
Again, that's something that we're like just starting to get a bit more serious about right now. We do track metrics, and we've been talking about like what are like metrics for success. So one of them for us is that we have not just github.com, but we have a lot of external other sites for things like our conferences, but also things like our developer site. And so not all of them are using the design system yet. So one of our metrics for success is that over time, all of them use the design system. And not only that, but make it easier for them to stay up to date with that design system, which is one of the reasons we're sort of thinking about how we distribute the packages and things like that. So that's certainly a metric. And then I've been looking at stats in terms of like how many views in our code base use our design system, and like and I've been tracking individual projects, like what percentage of the code base is on the new color system, and progressing that, tracking that as the project progresses. So I think that is really important to have visibility into is this successful, but there's probably other things that we want to do, like it's not just like how much of our site is using the design system. It's like, are they using it in the way that's intended, or are there a lot of overrides, or is there like a component that exists that's only used once? So that's those sorts of metrics are things that I'd like to start tracking now. So that's something we're actually working on at the moment.
Right. And since having the design system in place, have you seen any improvements to either the efficiency or the overall consistency of the updates that are released to the product?
Yeah, there's been a fair amount of new features shipped over the last year, and it's been great to have the new system in place, because people have tended to, when they're rebuilding something anyway, they're able to more easily use the new system. And we've had a lot of positive comments from designers and engineers that they just find it a lot faster to build stuff out. There was one project where they were out without a designer for part of the project, and two of the engineers were able to get really, really far with building out the UI just by using the new styles and referring to the documentation, which is great because it means that design wasn't a complete bottleneck for that project to get underway. So yeah, we started, a few of us were saying we should start to like keep track of all the nice comments, so that when we're having a bad day we can go and look at it.
Yeah. So it's interesting that you mentioned that design, it wasn't a bottleneck for the engineers in that case. Do you find that without a design system in place, that can be a common challenge in the product development process, that the design process can be the one that's sort of harder to scale and harder to match velocities with?
It's an interesting question. I think that there's a lot of companies maybe don't have as many designers as they like to have. I don't think that there was like no design process involved before engineers start building something, because there was already product thinking and design explorations early on. They just didn't have someone there at the beginning of the project to like help them implement it. So I don't really know if I have a great answer to that question, to be honest, but I think you've got to have design thinking in there somewhere. But I don't think that has to always be from a designer. Like, I think that engineers and product managers can make great design decisions too. And having some of the really simple design decisions documented, like, and common UI patterns documented, that's something that I think doesn't require the presence of a designer to help you get through. But I think at some point in the project, you need help from a designer to make sort of bigger, like, user experience decisions and things like that.
Right. And looking back at the whole design systems journey that you've sort of been on at GitHub, are there any parts of it that, if you could go back and do a different way, that you would do that?
Yes. One, as we started to be sort of pulled in a few more different directions, I think, like, in hindsight, earlier on, I would have been a bit more strict about, like, no, we're going to focus on one or two things at a time and not try to do a bit of everything. And that I think resulted in us feeling like we were always busy, but not because it slowed down us shipping like faster, because we were trying to do a bit here and a bit there and a bit somewhere else. And I think that also harmed the reputation of the team to start off with, because it wasn't so obvious what we were doing. So I think I would, in hindsight, I would have gone, okay, who's important to talk with to prioritize this work, and be protective of our time and also our reputation as a team, and say, like, okay, we want to, yes, all of these things are important, but we're going to just have to pick a couple of them so that we can actually be visibly shipping, and also, be able to give more attention to fewer projects at a time and do a better job. So that was probably like one of the hardest lessons I've learned, which sounds so simple and really obvious right now, but it took a while to figure that out and develop a better, like, planning and prioritization process.
Right.
It just felt there was like a lot of things. It felt like everything was important to start with. So that was probably the biggest one. And then a really funny but very specific story. We don't do things that that make builds fail, I would say, is like a really good one. We introduced a linter that failed if you added new styles that we had decided that we should deprecate, and that just frustrated everybody. So but on the other hand, then people knew our team existed, so maybe it wasn't the worst thing. But yeah, don't block people's workflow
Yeah, that's always
without
important.
really good reason. Yeah.
Right. And do you find now with the design systems team that you do try to focus much more on just a handful of tasks instead of, doing a little bit here and there?
Yeah, as much as possible. Like, I think it's just the nature of this type of work that we are going to get constant requests for help or questions, because it's still there's still more work to be done. I don't think like it's just getting to the stage where I feel like the design system is kind of maturing, but there's still a lot of refactoring work to do. So I think, yeah, we're trying to be focused on like a couple of projects at a time, and then we just try and use like the first responder schedule and CSS bug rotation to try and deal with the sort of more smaller but frequent requests. But yeah, definitely, and it actually feels much better like that. It feels like we can be more focused, and it feels like we can ship things a bit more often. So
Right. And how does the team prioritize the work? Is it for instance done at a team level where, let's say, every week you guys walk through all the different requests and kind of delegate that out to different folks, or is it much more autonomous where everybody kind of does that on their own?
I think it depends on the level of the project and the size of the task. So on smaller tasks, the team is autonomous and makes their own decisions. And sometimes if they're a little bit unsure, then they'll ping me, or just ping a few of us in our Slack channel, and we'll have a quick chat about it. And if it's something that feels like we need to have a wider discussion, then we'll schedule that. And then for the bigger projects, the bigger initiatives, I meet with my manager, who is also a contributor on the web and creative team, and the head of design. And so they're both able to be able to look at projects sort of across the company a bit more, and give me a heads up if there's someone I need to sync up with that I don't realize, or just a heads up about just the projects down the pipeline. And then I also bring up to them like what have been the day-to-day things that have been happening that I think that we need to give more attention to. So yeah, it's a bit of both. It's some sort of higher level, like broader, larger project planning, and then yeah, generally day-to-day people are trusted to make their own decisions.
Gotcha. And the last question that I've asked the folks that I've spoken to so far is, if you could sit down for a few minutes with somebody who's about to embark on creating their design system, what would be some of the urgent advice you would try to get across to them?
Oh, well, I think I would be like, document everything from the beginning, document as you go, but don't worry too much about how beautiful that documentation is. That would be definitely high up on the list. Like I was just saying, try to focus on fewer things at a time, which I think is just generally sensible advice. And figure out like what are the biggest pain points that people are experiencing, because if you can solve them for the rest of your team, then you're gonna win some fans, and those people will become your champions as you like grow and expand the design system.
Gotcha. Well, Diana, thanks so much for taking the time to kind of explain your experience and your journey at GitHub so far. This has been very interesting and insightful. So yeah, appreciate the help.
No worries. It was great to talk to you.
Yeah, absolutely, Diana. All right, take care and have a great rest of your afternoon.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Take care.